People who have surprisingly woken up admitted into a hospital. What happened? I have never just woken up in the hospital. In fact, I've been in the hospital very rarely in my life because I'm just a perfect human specimen who definitely has organs and isn't some sort of weird AI-generated image. But let's hear about more fragile human beings, shall we? Story 1. Wife, 2-year-old son, and myself went to visit a couple of friends out in the country. Had some food, had a couple of drinks myself, had an amazing time. Wife was sober, I was wrangling my young one back into his car seat to go home because he was overtired and unhappy, but made sure he was good and snug. Pulled out of the driveway after waving goodbye to our friends. I came almost a month and a half later. I could barely move my legs and arms due to neuropathy and fatigue. I had a feeding tube up my nose and a colostomy bag. The doctor told me that I had actually come a couple days before while I was still in intensive care, but the nature of the anesthetic they had me on meant I kept kinda waking up, fading back, and forgetting everything. At this point, I was able to remember things normally. They told me right off the bat my son was fine, completely unharmed, and in the care of a very old and dear friend with 3 of his own already. My wife was alive and relatively uninjured with the exception of some damage to her leg and a moderate brain injury that she would recover from slowly. They kept the details about the accident from me for a few weeks while I was recovering, but basically, my wife missed a stop sign in the middle of a dark, poorly marked country road, and we got T-boned by an SUV. Other driver was fine. It's been over 2 years since the accident. I got the strength back to walk again, but because of pins, bolts, plates, and my left ankle and shin, I'll never likely be able to run again. The neuropathy in my legs wore off, and eventually wore off in my arms to the point where I can use them normally again, but it was a lot of therapy, retraining, and time. Suffered PTSD about 10 months after by the time I was back at home. From time to time, I still have nightmares about something that I don't technically have the ability to remember. Ooh, that is a heartbreaking one, but I'm very relieved to read that everyone ended up okay, especially your wife and child, because, boy, that could have been a pretty sad start to this video. But, 2 years sticking with that therapy, getting your life back, good on you. I can't imagine how difficult that must be. And, be careful on those country roads, folks. Story 2. Woke up in hospital sheets covering my body and not remembering how I got there. Once they said I got into an accident, I thought I was driving in my SUV and I kept asking if I hurt anyone else and who was with me. Once they said I was on my motorcycle, I then noticed I was covered in sheets and kept asking if all my body parts were attached. Then, once they said yes, I kept trying to figure out how it happened. By that time, my mom and sis were there and kept asking to see my helmet and stuff to try to figure out how it happened. Kept repeating all the questions many times, forgetting I had asked them. Had a concussion and torn muscle on my arm and banged up pretty bad. Though they kept me in hospital for 2 days as my heart rate would not go down. Potassium deficiency was the cause. Memories slowly came back within a few days. Didn't lose my memory, just the events of that day. Still to this day, I can't recall the actual accident. I just remember being held down on the road by people and me begging them to move me as I was burning an oil from my bike. Then an ambulance arrived and paramedics tried to keep me awake. What had happened was that a car in the middle lane decided to go into the corner gas station crossing the right lane and the turning lane. I was in the right lane, hit the back right tire area, running into the car helmet first and bouncing back onto the concrete, cracking my helmet. Yay for helmets. Frick concussions and losing my young guy immortality mind. Folks, I love motorcycles. I love pedal biking. But no matter what kind of bike you're on, wear a helmet. I have known multiple people whose lives were very literally saved by helmets. This is a bicycle incident, but I know a guy who he had fallen off his bike, and when he got up, he felt like a poking on his forehead, and he took his helmet off, and this pointy rock like this long was buried into his helmet all the way through where just the tip was hitting his skin. If there hadn't been a helmet there, there's a chance that would have buried into his skull. So, wear a helmet. Story 3. I was 12 in 1982, woke up in a hospital bed feeling fine, no idea what happened. Nobody else in the room. Last person I remember hanging out with was my friend Scott, so I called his house. His mom answered, advised me to call my parents. No answer on the home phone. So I'm sitting in this bed trying to figure out why I'm even there. I finally discovered that the rolling table over the bed opens up and there's a mirror under the lid. Across my forehead and down the whole right side of my face are fresh abrasions. Oh, that's why. Finally get a hold of Scott and learn the story, which I still don't remember. Was riding my bike down a sidewalk near the grade school. Sidewalk takes a 45-degree left turn and I cut the corner. Grass is deep and a little wet and my front wheel catches on the edge of the sidewalk, flipping me over. I landed on my face, dragged against the other edge of the sidewalk, knocked out cold. Another neighborhood kid was in the area, hustled back to alert my parents. My dad took me to the hospital in his car and I woke up the next day. Yes, my parents just left me in the hospital by myself. Your parents went home to bang. Story 4. I was running a half marathon with a friend and we had just passed the 10-mile mark and I felt like I was getting into a groove after I struggled a bit the previous few miles. Woke up the next day in the ICU with my family all around me. Heat stroke plus rhabdomyolysis. I was admitted with a temp of 108.6 and they were telling my family to prepare for the worst. Had to stay in the hospital for a few days and then take it easy for a few months, but otherwise came out unscathed. Don't recommend it. I'm a running coach and you'd be surprised how many runners who fall ill with heat stroke mention finally feeling smooth or relaxed or in the groove right before they collapse. Sometimes they even stop sweating, say they feel better, then hit the pavement. See, folks, this is just proof that you can be running to try and keep in shape and it's dangerous for your health. So don't ever exercise. No, obviously exercise is great. But you do have to be careful with it. And runners are folks, I'm not a big runner. I'll run a couple miles every now and again if the weather's right and everything, but I'm more of a bicycle man myself. But runners are just so determined and they love getting in that running groove and it does feel nice, but folks, you gotta be careful. And if it's hot out, you'd be surprised just how much water you are sweating out when you're doing that stuff. So, extra caution advised. Story 5. Was at school about 8 years old. It was a sports carnival day. I don't know if they have that everywhere. It's where the whole school spends the day competing in various sports. I was watching the other group play t-ball. Next minute, hospital. I woke up feeling like I had just dreamed that I was in an ambulance. Apparently, I did briefly wake in the ambulance, but not for long. I was thwacked in the forehead with a flying metal bat, had a massive abrasion which turned into the oddest scab you'd ever seen, like a unicorn had its horn lopped off. Still have a scar where my skull cracked and healed with a kind of divot in it. Story 6. Woke up in the hospital summer of 2002, cuffed to a hospital bed, tubes all over me and stitches all over my chest. The night before, I was hit by a drunk driver, had an inch gash down the center of my chest exposing a few ribs. After I was discharged, I spoke with a gas station attendant who told me that he denied the driver a beer sale because he was already wasted. That butthole was never found. That was pretty bad, but apparently I woke up in a daze a few hours earlier. Doctor had me sedated and arms secured to the bed because I was trying to pull my catheter out. Story 7. I was at a party with a friend in some college town. The street we were on had these 3-story apartments built side by side. The whole street was partying, even on the roofs. We got separated and it was time to go. We don't live in that town. Anyways, I saw an ambulance going down the street and knew it was for my roommate. So I followed the ambulance and sure enough, he was laying on the ground, barely conscious. He tried to jump from one building to the next and didn't even come close. Luckily for him, his head broke the fall. A few weeks later, he finally asked, "Oh yeah, hey man, that night we went to Lawrence and I woke up in the hospital, what happened?" His head broke from the fall. I'm amazed he didn't freaking die. Falling on your head often doesn't end well. Ooh, This is why I'm thankful that I really didn't attend any, truly wild college parties. Don't get me wrong. Attended some college parties, and, perfectly legal, we were all 21 drinking occurred. I actually think that's true. But, the wild parties where you start doing, trying to jump from one roof to the other. I mean, I don't have a great solution. Just maybe if you're going to have wild parties, have a few designated, accident preventers. It's like a designated driver, but the person who stands on the roof and goes, don't.
Story 8. This was back in 2012. I was a bartender at the time. I kicked out a guy and his buddy after one of them flipped out and lost his crap over a bet in a game of pool. He was acting pretty aggressive, and when I started to come out from behind the bar to escort him out, he threw his bar glass at him. I closed the bar down about an hour later. As I was walking out the back door, there he was about 10 feet from me and still peed off that I'd tossed him out. That's the last thing I remember. All the other details come from my girlfriend who had called 911 and saw the whole thing go down. I blacked out. When I came to, I had been told that I had been stabbed 5 times and had the top of my ear cut off. I was in the local hospital getting staples and stitches and waiting to be transported to another hospital to have my ear reattached. Right before I was about to be transported, the police came in to her and told me they found the guy. He still had the bloody knife in his pocket and a bunch of prescription drugs in his hotel room. Story 9. Walking home from work, I was hit by a truck. Even though it wasn't a hit and run, I didn't know who the driver was until about a month later. Strangely, I didn't think enough to ask. I was having dinner at my best friend's place and his older brother came home and looked at me as though he'd seen a ghost. Story 10. Fell off monkey bars at a playground and was knocked unconscious. Remember waking up in a hospital bed to a doc telling my parents about some metal in my head x-ray and then them taking my ponytail out. Metal was in my hair tie. This is the kind of doctor I would be. There's metal in her head. Holy crap, what do we do? Panic, panic, panic. Someone do something for the love of God. She's dying. Story 11. Cut a guy off while bartending in college. He wasn't too happy, grabbed a bottle, and chucked it at the back of my head as I turned around. Woke up in a hospital bed with my best regular and his wife, ensuring me I'd be okay and the guy wouldn't be a problem. Super reassuring, other than the fact that this was pretty unsavory biker bar and the regulars, though amazingly kind and loyal to me, weren't the most savory human beings. 38 stitches, a partially shaved head, and 3 days later, I was at lunch with the same regulars.
Ugh, really making me question that dream I've had about becoming a bartender at my own bar if there are going to be people chucking bottles at my head and, getting stabbed like the other guy. Oh my gosh. Folks, just, be careful and be careful everywhere. Apparently everywhere is very, very dangerous, but, especially when drinking's involved, so, yeesh.
Story 12. My brother and I were outside playing with squirt guns. This was 2001, so I would have been 11. Next thing I know, it's Easter Sunday. I was in a hospital bed with a massive headache and blurred vision, and the last thing I remembered was 4 days ago. Apparently, I fell backwards and smacked my dome on the curb hard enough to fracture my skull and bruise my brain. Got 2 weeks off school, which was cool back then, and I've had to wear glasses ever since. Apparently, according to my mom, the first sign of consciousness in the hospital was me getting out of bed, taking a pee on the floor, and then going back to sleep for 2 more days. The whole thing was a weird experience. Story 13. Happened when I was in kindergarten. Apparently, I fell down the stairs after stepping on my own trousers. If this were in cartoons, you'd still be okay. Story 14. I hopped into the back of a mate's pickup after a rugby game, went to sleep, and woke up in the ICU in traction with no feeling from my waist down. Turns out we had a head-on collision with a drunk driver, and I went through the back of the cab picking up a host of broken body parts, including 4 compressed vertebrae. A year and a number of surgeries later, I walked out of hospital an inch shorter and with enough metal in me to set off metal detectors at airports. I was the lucky one. The other 3 guys in the truck never woke up afterwards. 20 years, and it still gets me. Drunk drivers are probably my #1 source of rage in the world. I don't care who you think you are. If you drink and drive, you can go frick yourself.
Hey, I'm going to fully agree with this OP and say, if you're drinking and driving, I'm not allowed to do that. Editor, I'm sorry, I won't make you blur it. But, yeah, F you people. Don't do that. Don't take that risk, especially in these days when there's Uber and all this other stuff. And yeah, sometimes I know it's expensive, but if you're going to get wasted like that, save some cash for a safe ride home, please. I have lost people in my life to drunk drivers, and most of you will probably lose someone that you know of within your lifetime to drunk drivers. It's not great.
Story 15. I was watching Voyager on TV. Next thing, I was in a hospital bed. Turns out I'd gotten up too fast, lacked blood flow to the head, and passed out, hitting my head on the floor hard. I'm 6'6", and fractured my skull. Confusing. I was watching Voyager on TV. Next thing, I was in a hospital bed. No explanation needed. Story 16. 18-year-old me got super wasted on Smirnoff watermelon vodka at some little club in Clearwater, Florida. Apparently, I fell off a tall bar stool and busted my head. When I woke up, I wasn't even sure what state I was in. I accidentally called my friend's mom in North Dakota trying to get a ride to somewhere other than the hospital. A decade later, and I still can't drink anything with that watermelon flavor. I'm pretty sure watermelon vodka Clearwater, Florida could have summed that up. Story 17. Was at the pool. Next thing I know, I woke up in a hospital bed feeling very cold and my throat hurts. Turned out, I'd actually drowned, but the lifeguard had pulled me out and reanimated me for about 45 minutes. Then I was flown to the hospital by helicopter where I lay in a coma for 2 days, during which they kept my body temperature low to prevent cerebral damage caused by lack of oxygen. I could go home a week after the incident. That's an amazing lifeguard. Story 18. Does it count if I woke up in hospital surprised with the results? I went in for a stomach operation, woke up and said, doesn't hurt that bad. My surgeon, mother, anesthesiologist, and 2 nurses all looked super awkward and said, well, we didn't do the surgery. You had an allergic reaction to one of the drugs given to you in the anesthetic process and flatlined. We spent 40 minutes stabilizing you. I was absolutely in awe. I felt fine until I started to get clammy, then my blood pressure went to 40/20 again and I passed out. Spent 4 days in ICU and a week in total in hospital. Story 19. Was knocked out by a flying squirrel while bike riding near my house.
I mean, part of me wants more details, like how did a flying squirrel knock you out while you were riding your bike? But part of me really doesn't, because I feel like it would ruin the mystique of the whole thing. Like, yeah, it probably hit you and you freaked out and fell off your bike and hit your head, but what's in my imagination is just so much better.
Story 20. Mine is kind of boring. Driving my car and bam, suddenly everything is slow motion. Then I'm in the ICU naked and so high on morphine, saw the light and everything. Apparently another car driving 70 miles per hour T-boned me. This stuff terrifies me. I'm confident in my own ability to drive. It's other people I worry about. Story 21. I was 16 and hit by a Ford F-350. I'm a tiny human. I'm under 5 feet, and this truck hit me going 40 miles per hour when I was in the crosswalk. The hit launched me across the entire intersection. I don't remember anything from 20 minutes before until 10 days later. When I woke up, finally, I had been in a coma for 5 days. Both my lungs had collapsed. I had 3 blood transfusions, a chest tube to drain the internal bleeding, 3 surgeries, and the whole left side of my body was broken. I couldn't walk and my vision and memory had been damaged. It's been 6 years and I'm doing great now. You wouldn't even know anything happened to me except I have memory issues and arthritis. But I like to think I came out on top in this situation. Story 22. I was shot in the stomach about 2 feet's range by a guy who had the gun in his backpack. He was in the process of robbing a store when I walked in, and I didn't see it happening as he had the gun hidden, and a lot of other people in the store didn't know either. I asked him if he was in line because he was kind of to the side, and he turned and fired. I don't remember anything after entering the store. The rest I've pieced together. He shot me 3 times, hitting mostly muscle, but also 1 kidney. I'm entirely fine today, but that was a fairly alarming realization of how close I came.
I mean, there's not even advice for how to avoid a situation like this, and I think that's why this one kind of scares me, like more than some of the others. Like these other little accidents feel so random, but this was a person making a choice that the person who got shot in the stomach would have no idea and, was just politely asking a question. I don't know, this one's messing me up a little bit.
Story 23. Had a seizure at work and was apparently walking into walls and fell down in the bathroom. My mom came to pick me up, brought me to my place. I fell down and had another seizure, and my mom called an ambulance. All I can remember was going into the bathroom at work and puking in my lesson room. I woke up in an ICU with everyone telling me that I had brain cancer and that I only had 2 weeks to live. They started chemo treatment immediately at Cedars, and I'm now completely clean of cancer. Story 24. I was going out with some friends on my 21st birthday. We were pre-gaming and they fed me a lot of shots. We hop in a cab and set to go out to the clubs. Next thing I know, I wake up in a hospital bed. The moment I opened my eyes, I knew where I was and how I probably got there. Turns out I jumped out of the cab prematurely and hit my head. I didn't have any physical marks on me, nor did my head hurt, not even a hangover. IVs will solve hangovers like nobody's business.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.